Hey guys, tonight we're stepping quietly into the twilight of a long ago age, where the smell of peat fires drifts from crooked chimneys and the last rays of sun slip behind the hills. Don't worry, you won't have to milk cows or churn butter, but you might need to get used to the mud on your shoes. Medieval dating was not for the faint of heart. In fact, if you ever time traveled here for a blind date, you'd probably call your travel agent and demand a refund. You probably wouldn't survive this, at least, not with your modern ideas of romance intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the edge of a medieval village. The road beneath your feet is more of a damp track than a proper path, churned into ruts by carts and lined with tufts of grass. The last bit of daylight gives way to a watery blue evening, and smoke from dozens of hearths drifts lazily across the thatched rooftops. A faint tang of wood smoke and something less pleasant, maybe damp hay or last week's cabbage, fills the air. The first thing you notice is how quiet it feels. There's no steady hum of cars, no electric glow from windows. Just the distant bleating of a goat, and the slow creak of a wooden gate. Somewhere, a dog barks twice, and then the night settles again. You pass a cluster of villagers gathered at the well, their faces turned toward you as you approach. They're sizing you up, your clothes, your boots, maybe even your haircut. Outsiders attract curiosity, and in a world where travel is rare, you're as strange to them as they are to you. Someone mutters something you can't catch, and you wonder if it's friendly or not. Walking into the heart of the village, you notice that everything seems smaller than you'd expect. The cottages squat low to the ground, their doors barely reaching your shoulder. It's not that the people are tiny, but that building materials were scarce, and heat escaped too easily from tall rooms. You duck beneath a lintel as you step into the dim glow of a common room. The place smells of damp wool, roasted onions, and the ever-present smoke of the hearth. At first, nobody speaks to you. Instead, you feel their glances, quick, appraising, and not entirely unfriendly. A boy leans against the doorframe, gnawing on a bit of bread. A woman at the table looks up from stitching what might be a sleeve. The old man by the fire doesn't even glance. He just stares into the flames, as if he's seen 100 strangers before and knows better than to ask questions. You find yourself thinking that first impressions here must have been a whole different game. In your own time, a smile or a clever remark might break the ice. Here, it's about posture, tone of voice, and the unspoken approval of whoever runs the household. You wonder if your sneakers have already doomed you. Historically, a village like this one would have been bound together by routines, tending animals, repairing thatch, preparing for the long winters. Outsiders weren't necessarily unwelcome, but they were certainly noteworthy. Travelers could bring news or trade, or trouble. That tension hums faintly in the air as you settle yourself on a bench near the hearth. A young man slides a rough wooden mug across the table to you. It holds a cloudy, thin ale, barely stronger than water, but safer to drink than the well. You thank him and take a sip. It tastes faintly sour, but at least it's wet. He nods at you, as if to say you've passed some small test. You glance around the room again and realize something else. There's a kind of quiet intimacy in this space. People aren't strangers to one another. Every gesture, every glance carries a history. The way the woman sets down her needle when the boy laughs, the old man's slow stirring of the fire, the shared silence as you all listen to the rain starting outside, it's the sort of closeness that modern life rarely offers. Still, there's a nervousness in the air that you can't quite name. It might just be you, the foreigner in sneakers, but it feels like something else. Maybe it's that in this age, the arrival of any newcomer could mean the start of a story, for better or worse. And in a small village, stories tend to spread faster than the smoke through the rafters. One widely accepted fact about medieval life is that most people rarely traveled more than a few miles from where they were born. Villages were tight-knit, not just by necessity but by sheer geography. Meeting someone from another village was an event. Meeting someone from another country? practically legendary. A lesser-known detail is that villages often had their own subtle codes, ways of testing a stranger's character. The way you greeted the elders, how you held your mug, even the steadiness of your gaze could mark you as friend or foe. Travelers sometimes found themselves welcomed with bread and salt in one hamlet, and cold suspicion in the next. Historians still wonder if such hospitality tests were formalized rituals or just local habits passed down by tradition. Were there unwritten rules, or was it simply human instinct to judge quickly in uncertain times? No one can say for sure, though the wary eyes watching you from the hearth might offer a clue. As you sip the ale again, the door creaks open to admit a gust of cool night air and a figure wrapped in a patchwool cloak. The new arrival nods curtly to the others, then settles on the bench across from you. You can't tell if their glance is curious, suspicious, or merely tired. Either way, you realize you've taken your first step into a world where meeting people, especially someone who might be more than a passing acquaintance, follows its own strange customs. Outside, the rain softens to a drizzle, and the sound of it pattering on thatch is oddly soothing. You lean back slightly, feeling the rough wood of the bench beneath your shoulder blades, and wonder how many quiet stories began in a room just like this, a meeting of strangers over sour ale and a shared fire, watched by the whole village as if the scene were a play. The villagers begin to drift off to their own homes, leaving you with the creak of the rafters and the steady hiss of the rain. You feel as though the night itself is settling in around you, as if the village is gently acknowledging your presence, no longer an intruder, just another soul seeking warmth and rest in the dark. The morning in the village begins before you're ready for it. There's no alarm clock, just the uneven chorus of roosters and the clatter of buckets near the well. A draft slides under the door and nudges you awake, and for a moment you're not sure where you are. Then the smell of damp straw and wood smoke reminds you. You sit up, rubbing the sleep from your eyes. Outside, the sky is a soft gray, the kind of color that promises drizzle later in the day. The sounds of daily life drift through the thin walls. The snort of a horse being led from a stable, the murmur of a woman calling to a child, and the distant splash of water being hauled up from the well. You step outside into the morning air and nearly trip over a chicken. The ground is muddy but firm enough, the kind of mud that clings stubbornly to your boots. Villagers move about with purpose, their glances darting toward you but never lingering for long. They've accepted your presence, at least for now. Across the square, a group of young people stand near a cart piled with sacks of grain. They're dressed in patched wool and homespun linen, yet there's a brightness to their faces, a spark that suggests the morning's errands are more than just chores. A girl laughs at something one of the boys says, then quickly lowers her eyes as an older woman passes. You catch that look and recognize it, the half-shy, half-bold glance of someone hoping to be noticed. This, you realize, is what first impressions look like in a world without dating apps or coffee shops. The marketplace, the well, and the edges of the fields are where young people often met for the first time. It wasn't necessarily romantic. Sometimes it was just a curious exchange of words while trading eggs or asking about the weather. You notice how much is said without words. The way a young man shifts his weight when he sees a certain girl approach. The way her fingers linger just a moment too long as she hands him a bundle of herbs. A sideways glance carries more meaning than a dozen modern texts. A widely accepted historical fact is that in much of medieval Europe, marriages, especially among farming families, were often arranged by parents or relatives. Love was not the primary factor. Alliances, land, and security usually took priority. A boy's parents might quietly approach a girl's parents long before either of them had exchanged more than a polite greeting. Yet a lesser-known detail is that even in such a structured system, the young people themselves often had small ways to signal interest or resistance. A boy might offer to help carry a heavy sack, or linger near the well longer than necessary. A girl might accept a small gift, or deliberately forget to return it. These gestures were subtle, but in a small village where everyone watched everyone else, even the subtlest actions carried weight. Historians still debate just how much freedom young villagers truly had in choosing their spouses. Were these shy glances merely tolerated courtship rituals within the rigid framework of family negotiations, or did they represent genuine acts of rebellion, tiny sparks of personal choice in a world where most decisions were made by elders. You watch as a young man with straw-colored hair approaches a girl carrying a basket of cabbages. He offers to carry it for her, but she shakes her head with a quick smile and keeps walking. Her friends exchange knowing looks and hide their grins behind their hands. The boy shrugs, pretending not to care, but his ears are a little red. There's something disarming about these interactions. They're simple, unpolished, and utterly public. There's no hiding in a private message thread, no ghosting, no curated profile pictures. Just two people in plain sight of the entire village, risking a tiny piece of their pride in the hope of being noticed. As you stand by the well, an elderly man leans on his stick and watches you. He tells you, with a thin smile, that in his youth a girl's first words to a suitor were often not words at all, just a raised brow or the way she shifted her scarf. You wonder how many great romances began with a single glance across a muddy square. The rain begins again, light but persistent, and villagers pull their hoods tighter. You step under the overhang of a nearby cart, feeling the rough wood against your back as you watch the morning unfold. There's a slow rhythm to it all, chores, glances, quiet conversations, that seems both fragile and enduring. You can't help but think of your own time, where first impressions can be filtered and rehearsed, endlessly adjusted before they're sent into the world. Here, there's no such luxury. There's only the raw immediacy of a shared moment, and the knowledge that half the village will know about it by nightfall. Somewhere, a bell begins to toll from the small church at the edge of the square. It's not just a call to prayer, it's a reminder that life here runs on a shared schedule, a common heartbeat. You imagine that for centuries, this sound marked the moments when glances were exchanged, introductions were made, and stories quietly began. As the drizzle softens into a mist, you realize that you've just witnessed the medieval version of an awkward first meeting, less polished, less private, but perhaps more honest. You feel the quiet weight of that honesty as you turn toward the road leading to the fields, where the day's work and the village's unspoken dramas will continue. By the time evening settles in again, you've begun to feel the rhythm of the village. The way the air cools as the sun slips down, the smell of peat smoke thickening, the way people hurry to finish chores before the church bell tolls. The bell itself rings from a small wooden tower, a deep, slow sound that seems to hang in the damp twilight. It's not just a signal for prayer, it's the medieval equivalent of a curfew siren. You stand by the doorway of the inn-like common house where you spent the previous night. The room behind you glows with a buttery light from tallow candles. Their flames sway slightly as someone walks past, and you catch the faint, animal smell of the wax. The tables are rough-hewn, the benches even rougher, but the people gathered there lean toward each other, as if the glow itself were a kind of safety. Out in the village square, shadows stretch long across the rutted ground. Couples speak in low voices near doorways or pause just beneath the overhangs of their homes. The soft hum of their conversations drifts across the square, broken now and then by the cluck of a chicken that hasn't quite settled for the night. You're struck by how early everything seems to wind down. In your time, the night might just be beginning. Here, it's when the world closes in tight. The streets grow quiet not because people don't want to linger but because the night belongs to more than just people. There are foxes, stray dogs, the possibility of thieves, and the ever-present chill that seeps in once the sun is gone. A widely accepted historical fact is that many towns and villages in medieval Europe enforced curfews. Bells were rung at sunset or shortly thereafter, signaling that fires should be banked and doors closed. Sometimes, gates to walled towns were literally locked. The night was not for strolling or visiting, it was for staying put. A lesser-known detail is that the curfew bell wasn't entirely the end of social life. In some places, especially smaller villages, neighbors and young people would gather by hearth fires after the bell had rung. They'd sit close to the warmth, talk quietly, or even share music played on a pipe or a rebec. It was during these dim, firelit hours that more private exchanges could happen, an extra glance, a hand brushing another hand while reaching for a piece of bread. Historians still wonder how strictly such curfews were enforced in rural communities. Was the bell a firm order or more of a suggestion, a reminder that darkness was risky? Records show penalties for those caught wandering after dark in some towns, But it's hard to know how often that rule was applied in sleepy villages like this one. You step back inside the common room and feel the warmth hit your cheeks. The air smells of stew, onions, leeks, maybe a bit of salted pork. A few villagers sit clustered around the long table, their shoulders hunched but their faces animated by whatever story is being told. At the far end of the room, near the hearth, you notice a young man and woman seated side by side on a bench that looks like it's seen 100 such evenings. They're not touching, but the way they lean slightly toward each other is telling. Their conversation is soft, their faces lit from below by the orange flicker of the fire. You can almost hear their story without a word. Perhaps they met at the market a few weeks ago, and exchanged glance over a bundle of carrots, a quick word while drawing water at the well. Now they sit together in the brief privacy that a crowded room somehow offers. The hum of voices around them, the crackle of the fire, the clatter of a spoon against a wooden bowl, these sounds are the soundtrack to their slow, cautious courtship. You realize how much the pace of romance here is tied to the pace of the day itself. There's no rushing it. With the curfew bell, the village shrinks to the size of a few firelit rooms, and love, or the hope of it, has to unfold in that small circle of light. A woman at the next table catches your eye and smiles faintly. You wonder how many generations have played out similar scenes in similar rooms, young people leaning toward each other as the fire burns low, older ones watching with something between amusement and memory. Outside, the wind rattles a loose shutter, and you hear the soft patter of rain against the roof. The sound is steady, like a whisper that fills the spaces between words. You can imagine why whispers themselves often carried such weight in moments like this. There's no better setting for a hushed promise than a room held together by the hum of a fire and the rain outside. The young couple by the fire doesn't notice your glance. They're caught in a small, fragile world of their own making, just two figures leaning toward each other in the flickering half-light. You think about how many such moments must have passed unnoticed by history. Private stories lost in the long shadow of wars, plagues, and politics. As the evening deepens, the old man from the night before stirs the fire with a poker. Sparks rise briefly and fall again. The woman at the table beside you pulls her shawl a little tighter around her shoulders. The young couple shifts closer together, as though the world around them has faded for just a heartbeat. You sip from your mug and feel the warmth slide down your throat. For a moment, you're not a stranger in this place but just another figure waiting out the rain, listening to the low murmur of voices and the distant, patient tolling of the curfew bell. Somewhere in the night beyond the walls, a dog barks once and then falls silent. The room seems to breathe as one, fire, rain, voices, all settling into the same slow rhythm. You think to yourself that if love has a sound in this age, it's the soft hush of voices leaning toward one another in the quiet hours after the bell. The next evening finds you in a low-roofed farmhouse on the outskirts of the village, your curiosity tugging you into one of the more peculiar traditions of medieval courtship. Outside, the dusk is heavy and cool, the smell of damp soil rising from the fields. A crooked lantern sways gently from a hook above the doorway, casting a wavering glow over the threshold. Inside, the house is warmer, but not by much. The hearth fire glows red, its embers throwing long shadows on the rough-plastered walls. The air is thick with the scents of wool and straw and the faint tang of smoke that clings to everything. The family who lives here, 2 parents, a grandmother dozing near the hearth, and a girl not yet 20, moves with the calm efficiency of people long accustomed to sharing their space. Tonight, you're here to witness something that would probably make any modern dating app developer drop their phone in disbelief: the practice of bundling. At first glance, it looks absurdly simple. A young man, invited by the girl's parents, has arrived after the evening meal. He sits stiffly at the far end of a long bench, hands folded as if he's not sure what to do with them. The girl sits beside her mother, pretending to stitch a hem but clearly aware of every movement he makes. The grandmother cracks one eye open and mutters something that makes the girl blush. Her father pretends not to notice, though his glance keeps drifting toward the young man with an expression somewhere between curiosity and quiet calculation. A widely accepted historical fact is that bundling, or, as it was sometimes called, courting in bed, was a recognized practice in parts of medieval and early modern Europe. The custom varied by region, but the basic idea was this. A young suitor might be invited to spend the night in the same bed as his intended, but with a barrier, often a stout wooden board or a tightly wrapped blanket, placed between them. A lesser-known detail is that bundling was often as much a practical arrangement as a romantic one. In cramped homes where private rooms were rare, this was a way for couples to speak at length in the only available quiet space, the bed, while still, theoretically, preserving the girl's virtue under the watchful eyes of the household. Historians still debate how often this practice actually served its intended, chaste purpose. Was the board a genuine deterrent, or merely a polite fiction? Folklore is filled with winks and knowing asides, but the records themselves are vague. Even so, the existence of such a custom tells you a great deal about the pragmatic, occasionally awkward ways in which love and courtship threaded their way through the daily routines of medieval families. You watch as the girl's father, after some quiet murmuring with his wife, produces what looks like a heavy plank of seasoned wood. He slides it into place across the middle of the bed, a simple straw-stuffed mattress laid on a wooden frame. The grandmother, half awake now, cackles softly. The girl puts aside her stitching and smooths the blanket with what you suspect is more nervousness than tidiness. The young man glances at her and then away again, suddenly finding the floor fascinating. You wonder what they might say to each other once the room grows quiet, the fire burning low, the parents pretending to sleep in the same room. Perhaps they'll talk about the next harvest, or the way the sky looked at dawn, or the future that neither of them has quite dared to imagine yet. The sight is at once tender and strangely comical. There is no candlelit privacy, no romantic serenade, just two young people sitting stiffly on opposite sides of a wooden board, while the family snores and the wind at the shutters fill the silences between them. You imagine the stories that must have been whispered in countless such beds. Promises of patience, awkward compliments, maybe even arguments about whether the wooden plank was really necessary. The thought makes you smile, even as you realize how deeply different their world was from yours. The hearthfire flickers low, casting long stripes of orange light across the room. The grandmother has truly fallen asleep now, her soft snores punctuating the hush. The girl's father gives one last, deliberate look toward the bed, as if to say, "We trust you both, but not entirely," before turning away and pulling a wool blanket over his shoulders. In the quiet that follows, you hear the soft murmur of voices from behind the wooden barrier. You can't make out the words, only the low, uncertain cadence of two people discovering each other's thoughts in the darkness. There's something unexpectedly human about it, about the way romance here unfolds in fits and starts, constrained by the space, the customs, the ever-present watchfulness of others. It's awkward, yes, but it's also oddly sweet. You lean against the wall near the hearth, the rough plaster cool beneath your back, and let the moment sink in. In your own time, people might complain about the lack of privacy in modern dating, about the endless commentary from friends and strangers online. Here, privacy is a rare luxury, and yet the simple act of speaking to one another in the same bed, separated by a board, is considered both daring and respectable. The wind outside rattles the shutters, and the fire sighs as another log collapses into embers. You wonder if the young couple will remember this night years from now, perhaps laughing together as they tell their children about how awkward it all was. Somewhere in that small farmhouse, as the hours pass, two voices murmur and pause and murmur again, while the rest of the household sleeps. It's a fragile thing, that soft thread of conversation in the dark, but you feel somehow privileged to witness it, even as a silent guest from centuries ahead. By the next morning, the sky is a pale silver sheet, with streaks of pink just visible over the ridge of distant hills. The rain has eased, leaving the fields damp and shining, and the village square is already buzzing with excitement. The air carries the smell of damp hay, wood smoke, and something new, spices, roasting nuts, the unmistakable aroma of a feast day. You follow a small crowd heading down the track that leads toward a meadow beyond the village. As you crest the slope, you see the field transformed. Bright pennants flutter from tall poles. Simple stalls of rough-hewn timber line the edges, their tabletops covered with bolts of dyed cloth, carved spoons, ribbons, and the occasional jug of ale. Children dart through the crowd, shrieking with laughter as they chase each other past the legs of more patient adults. There's a hum in the air, the kind that comes not from machines but from hundreds of conversations blending together, soft voices, bursts of laughter, the occasional sharp call from a hawker trying to sell his wares. A man leads a shaggy pony into the field while two older women haggle over a bundle of herbs. To you, it feels a bit like a country fair in your own time, minus the Ferris wheel, plus the faint smell of sheep. Today is a feast day, a rare break in the routine of work and a welcome excuse for young people to gather in one place under the approving eyes of parents and neighbors. You can almost feel the unspoken anticipation in the air. A festival is not just for trading or eating, it's for noticing who notices you. A widely accepted historical fact is that fairs and feast days were often the few times when people from neighboring villages mingled. For most of the year, distances, poor roads, and daily labor kept communities isolated. But on days like this, the barriers dissolved for a while. New faces meant new stories, new gossip, and sometimes, new chances at romance. A lesser-known detail is that many such fairs included games, tug-of-war, sack races, or tossing stones for distance, that weren't merely entertainment. For young men, winning a contest was a way to show strength and skill. For young women, watching from the sidelines offered a socially acceptable reason to linger near someone who caught their eye. Even dances, often accompanied by fiddles or simple flutes, provided a sort of structured permission to interact. Historians still wonder just how much freedom such fairs offered. Were they genuinely liberating moments for young people to mingle and flirt? Or were they simply another stage for the watchful eyes of elders to measure and approve behavior? The truth likely lies somewhere between the two. You find yourself drawn to a circle of villagers gathered near a rope stretched between two posts. A tall young man with broad shoulders and a grin that seems to have won him a few admirers is preparing to test his strength in a tug-of-war. Opposite him, a team of 3 smaller men digs in their heels, determined to keep him from pulling them across the line. The crowd cheers as the contest begins. Feet slip in the damp grass, someone tumbles to the ground, and laughter ripples through the onlookers. You notice a girl near the edge of the circle glance at the tall young man, then quickly look away, her face slightly flushed. Her friends nudge her, hiding their giggles behind their hands. Not far away, a group of girls tosses hoops over wooden stakes, cheering each successful throw. A boy tries to show off by tossing 2 hoops at once and ends up tangling them together, earning a chorus of good-natured laughter. The air is full of that strange mix of competition and self-consciousness that always seems to hover wherever young people try to impress each other. You wander toward a makeshift dance area where a musician plays a lively tune on a fiddle that looks as if it's seen a few generations' worth of fairs. Couples form loose circles, their steps simple but rhythmic. Hands brush briefly as they change partners, eyes meet for a heartbeat, and then they part again, smiling. The dance is less about skill and more about the opportunity to share a few moments together in public without drawing too much suspicion. You imagine how thrilling this must have been for villagers whose lives were usually bounded by fields, hearths, and the same familiar faces. To see new people from neighboring villages, to be seen by them, to share a dance or a laugh, it must have felt as though the world had expanded just a little, if only for a day. A young boy tugs at your sleeve and points toward a man selling ribbons dyed a bright, improbable blue. You watch as a shy young man buys one and hesitates before approaching a girl standing nearby. He offers it wordlessly, his eyes fixed on the ground. She accepts it with a quick smile, tucking it into her hair, and you can almost hear the collective sigh of her friends behind her. As the afternoon drifts on, the sunlight softens to a mellow gold, and the laughter of children grows drowsy and slow. The contests wind down, the music becomes gentler, and the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread hangs in the cooling air. You notice how the fair feels both public and oddly intimate. Everyone sees everyone else, and yet there are countless private moments tucked into the crowd. Quick smiles, whispered jokes, the kind of glances that might linger in someone's memory long after the ribbons have faded and the games have ended. The shadows lengthen as the sun slips lower behind the hills. Lanterns are lit, their glow catching on the ribbons in the girl's hair and the polished buckles of the boys' boots. The music shifts to a slower tune, and couples take to the dance space again, moving a little closer now, a little less self-conscious in the forgiving dusk. You stand at the edge of the crowd, feeling the faint chill of the evening breeze and listening to the low hum of voices around you. It's easy to imagine that somewhere in the circle of dancers, two people are meeting each other's eyes for the first time, feeling that quick, silent spark that has always crossed the gap between strangers. The fair will end soon, the villagers will return to their homes, and tomorrow the routines of work and watchfulness will return. But tonight, under the swaying lanterns and the pale stars just beginning to appear, the meadow belongs to laughter, music, and the small, hopeful beginnings of stories that no historian will ever record. The next day begins quietly, as though the meadow itself has drawn a long, contented breath after the excitement of the fair. The morning air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of damp grass and ash from the torches that burned late into the night. Villagers move more slowly today, some with sore muscles from the games, others simply lingering in that pleasant haze that follows a day of celebration. You rise early and wander to the village square. The stalls are mostly gone, their tables stacked and ready to be hauled away. Only a few stragglers remain, an old man selling leftover honey cakes, a woman folding the bright pennants that had fluttered so proudly yesterday. A pair of boys crouches on the cobblestones, drawing in the dust with bits of charcoal, recreating the tug-of-war contest in miniature. In the corner of the square, near the low stone wall that marks the edge of the market space, you see the same shy young man who had given the blue ribbon the day before. He sits on the wall with his elbows on his knees, gazing across the square. The girl who accepted the ribbon walks past carrying a basket, her pace steady, her head lowered as though she does not notice him. But as she passes, she allows the corner of her mouth to curl upward in the briefest hint of a smile. He notices. His posture straightens, and the stillness of the morning suddenly feels lighter. A well-known fact about village life in the medieval period is that such small gestures often carried more meaning than elaborate declarations. In communities where everyone knew everyone else, courtship was rarely about dramatic confessions. It was built instead from brief exchanges, glances at the well, a shared loaf of bread, a ribbon given or received during a festival. These small moments were not merely romantic. They were also public signals. Each gesture was both personal and communal, as neighbors and kin watched, evaluated, and sometimes quietly approved or disapproved. A lesser-known detail is that parents and elders often paid as much attention to these small exchanges as the young people themselves. A ribbon might not be a betrothal gift, but it could be remembered months later during discussions about a potential marriage match. In some villages, older women were especially observant, taking note of who danced with whom, who lingered near whose gate, whose eyes followed which face during Massachusetts. Their quiet observations often shaped the choices presented to the young people later. You leave the square and follow the path that leads past the blacksmith's shop and toward the fields. The air grows fresher as you move beyond the cluster of cottages. The land stretches wide, dotted with grazing sheep and bounded by hedgerows. The morning sun glints on the damp blades of grass, each one trembling slightly in the breeze. At the edge of the field, a few young men work together to mend a fence, their laughter carrying easily across the open ground. A cart creaks by on the road, pulled by a slow-moving ox, and the man walking alongside it nods a greeting as he passes. It's a simple, unhurried rhythm of life, so steady that you can almost imagine the same sounds and gestures repeating across centuries. In the distance, near a small copse of trees, you notice a figure kneeling at the edge of a narrow stream. It's the girl with the blue ribbon. She is washing a wooden bowl, dipping it gently into the water and letting the current carry away the traces of yesterday's feast. For a moment she is entirely absorbed in the task, her hair falling forward to shield her face. Then she looks up and catches sight of you watching. Her expression is neither shy nor bold, merely calm, as though you are simply another passing presence in her morning. You nod in greeting, and she nods back before returning to her work. You sense that this brief, quiet exchange belongs more to her world than yours, a simple acknowledgement between neighbors, or near neighbors, where words are often unnecessary. You continue your walk along the stream. The sound of water running over small stones blends with the occasional chirp of a bird. The path eventually leads you toward a small wooden bridge that crosses the stream and connects the meadow to another patch of farmland. Here you pause, leaning on the rough railing and looking down at the water. It's easy to imagine how many such bridges have witnessed small, unremarkable moments like the one you just saw. They're rarely mentioned in chronicles or letters, if they were even written at all, but they formed the background against which countless lives unfolded. Historians often focus on wars, rulers, and dramatic events, yet it is scenes like this, quiet, unrecorded, repeated day after day, that made up the texture of most medieval lives. There is something almost humbling in the realization that while names and kingdoms changed, mornings still began with chores, water still needed carrying, ribbons still found their way from one pair of hands to another. A breeze stirs the reeds at the edge of the stream, and the ribbon in the girl's hair trembles slightly in the distance. For just a moment, the blue catches the sunlight and glows against the green of the fields. It's a fleeting sight, easy to miss, and yet strangely vivid. As the day moves toward noon, the village slowly wakes to its usual patterns. The blacksmith's hammer rings again, the shepherds call to their dogs, and children chase each other across the open space where the fair had stood. Yesterday's festival will linger in memory for a while, but the rhythm of ordinary life is already reasserting itself. You turn back toward the village, your steps unhurried. The path feels familiar now, and the air carries that same mix of earth, wood smoke, and damp grass that has come to mean home in this brief sojourn. Somewhere behind you, in a meadow slowly recovering from the trampled feet of dancers and games, a single ribbon of blue sways gently in the breeze, an unremarkable token, perhaps, but one that, for two people at least, may have marked the quiet beginning of something that will be remembered long after the fair itself is forgotten. The morning mist lingers in the hollows of the village as you wake to the muffled clink of a wooden latch. Outside you hear the shuffle of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and somehow expectant. Peeking through the narrow shutter, you see a stooped woman in a faded brown cloak making her way up the lane, leaning on a polished stick. She pauses to greet nearly every person she passes, exchanging nods, soft smiles, and, in some cases, low chuckles that seem to carry a hint of shared secrets. You soon learn that this is the village's unofficial matchmaker, though unofficial is a slightly misleading word. Everyone recognizes her role, and many quietly rely on her. She is known simply as Goodwife Breda, a name that is uttered with both respect and wariness. She knows who has an eligible son, whose daughter is too shy for her own good, who owns 2 cows but not enough land, and whose aunt once promised a goat in exchange for a dowry. By mid-morning you find yourself invited, well, not exactly invited, more gently ushered, into the dim interior of a low-beamed cottage that smells faintly of herbs and wood smoke. Breda is seated at a small table with a reed basket at her feet. From it, she occasionally draws small objects, a carved wooden spoon, a folded scrap of cloth, even what looks like a bundle of dried rosemary tied with twine. Each item, you suspect, has a story attached to it. A well-known historical fact is that in many medieval villages, courtship was not left entirely to the whims of the young. Marriages were often practical arrangements, shaped by family alliances, landholdings, and the need for steady labor. While church authorities insisted on the couple's consent, the process that led to that consent was frequently orchestrated by others, parents, kin, or trusted go-betweens like Breda. A lesser-known detail is how deftly such matchmakers operated in these small communities. They were part diplomat, part gossip, part negotiator, and occasionally, part sorcerer in the eyes of the more superstitious villagers. Some were said to carry charms in their pockets, knots of string or dried herbs, to tie hearts together. Others relied on nothing more than a shrewd eye and a sharp memory for who lingered a little too long at the village well or who blushed when a certain name was mentioned. Breda leans toward you now, her gaze sharp but not unkind. "A good match," she says, as though pronouncing an unchanging law of nature, "isn't just about liking each other. It's about knowing whether the seasons will be kind to them, whether the families can stomach sitting at the same table, whether they can laugh at each other's foolishness when the goats get into the garden." She chuckles softly at her own words and begins sorting through her basket. She lifts the carved spoon, running her thumb along its worn handle. "This," she explains, was given by a lad last spring to a girl he fancied. A simple spoon, but he carved it himself. His hands were rough from chopping wood, yet he smoothed this so well you'd think he'd done nothing but carve spoons his whole life. The girl kept it, for a while. She replaces the spoon and takes out the folded scrap of cloth. It is embroidered with a small, uneven pattern of flowers. This, she continues, came from a girl who wanted to show she had the patience to stitch and the heart to tend to a home. Not every lad knows what to do with such a gift, but the one who received this did. They're married now, living by the east pasture. You find yourself struck by how these small objects, tokens barely worth a few coins, carry immense significance. They're not simply keepsakes. They're proposals, promises, or at least gentle nudges toward the idea of a shared future. You think of the girl with the blue ribbon at the fair, and the way she had barely smiled at the boy who gave it. Breda would no doubt have noticed that smile and remembered it, adding it to the quiet inventory of potential unions that she carried in her mind. As the day warms and the shadows shorten, Breda invites you to join her as she makes her rounds. She moves slowly but with purpose, stopping by doorways to exchange a few words, sometimes taking a hand briefly in her own, sometimes leaving a sprig of rosemary or a small wrapped sweet. It's clear she is more than a simple negotiator. She is a thread running through the lives of those around her, weaving them together in ways they may never fully realize. At one doorway, she pauses after speaking to a young widow and murmurs to you as they part. It's not always about first loves. Sometimes it's about second chances, or even third. You wouldn't believe the ways people's hearts surprise them. Historians still debate just how much influence such figures wielded. Were they truly central to the making of marriages, or merely facilitators of what would have happened anyway? The truth is probably somewhere in between. In small, close-knit communities, even a quiet suggestion at the right time, offered by someone respected, could tip the balance. You and Breda end the afternoon seated on a rough bench outside her cottage. The sun is lowering, slanting its warm light across the thatched roofs and making the stream beyond the fields shine like a silver thread. She sips from a wooden cup, her eyes following the distant figures of villagers returning from the fields. "Remember this," she says after a while, her voice softer now. "A good match isn't just made by the young hearts that beat a little faster. It's made by the hands that build, mend, sew, and carry. But even then, a bit of luck never hurts." As twilight creeps into the village, you feel a strange sense of calm. There is something reassuring about Breda's quiet presence, and her belief that, despite hardships, human hearts continue to reach toward each other in ways both practical and tender. In the hush that settles as the last light fades, you imagine future generations walking the same lanes, exchanging the same shy glances, passing along carved spoons and embroidered cloths, while someone like Breda observes quietly from the corner of a room, ready to nudge fate along with a dry comment and a knowing smile. The next morning begins with the soft, hollow thud of a wooden pestle against grain, the distant crackle of a hearth fire, and the bleating of a goat that clearly thinks breakfast is overdue. You step outside into air that still holds a touch of night's coolness. The village is waking slowly, chimneys trailing thin threads of smoke, doors opening to reveal yawning figures carrying buckets toward the well. As you wander down the narrow lane, you notice a boy sitting cross-legged on a flat stone beside the well. His tongue sticks slightly out of the corner of his mouth, as he scratches something into a thin strip of birch bark with the tip of a small iron nail. A few curls of pale bark flake away and drift down onto his bare feet. When he realizes you're watching, he quickly hides the bark behind his back. His ears flush red. You don't say anything, but you suspect he's writing something he doesn't want anyone else to see. A well-known historical fact is that love notes and poems were often exchanged in medieval towns and villages, though far fewer of them survive than the solemn contracts of marriage or land. The wealthier and more literate wrote them on vellum, thin, smooth parchment made from animal skin, but for many, birch bark or scraps of paper bought at a fair were the only practical medium. A lesser-known detail is that not all of these notes were especially poetic. Some were little more than lists of virtues or awkward declarations of interest, scratched in uneven letters by someone whose main experience with writing was recording the tally of eggs collected that morning. Yet even these clumsy scrawls carried weight. They represented a private leap, a way of saying something that could not be spoken aloud under the watchful eyes of kin and neighbors. You continue your walk and soon reach the low wooden bridge by the stream. Here you find a young man leaning over the rail, dangling a piece of birch bark on a thin cord as though uncertain whether to drop it into the water or keep it. He startles when he notices you and straightens quickly, tucking the bark into his sleeve. His look is half defiant, half embarrassed. You nod, as if to say his secret is safe, and move on. Later in the morning, you are invited to the house of a prosperous cooper whose eldest daughter has recently drawn attention at the last festival dance. The family single-room house smells pleasantly of drying wood and honey. On a shelf near the hearth rests a folded square of creamy vellum tied with a thin strip of green-dyed wool. The cooper's wife notices your glance and smiles faintly. "It's from a lad in the next village," she explains in a voice both proud and cautious. "He sent it with his cousin last market day. My girl hasn't decided whether to answer yet." She doesn't show you the contents, but you catch a glimpse of tidy brown ink letters through the folds of the vellum. You wonder if the words inside are as smooth as the script suggests, or if they carry the same hopeful awkwardness you saw in The Boy by the Well. It's easy to forget how valuable such writing materials were in this period. Even the smallest piece of vellum required the work of a skinner, a parchment maker, and sometimes a careful scribe to rule the lines. Ink itself was mixed from soot, oak galls, or other painstakingly prepared ingredients. Sending a written note was not only an act of sentiment but also a small investment of time and resources, one that implied genuine seriousness. Historians still debate how widespread letter writing for courtship really was outside the urban centers and noble courts. Did rural sweethearts truly exchange words on scraps of bark, or is this image partly romanticized by later storytellers? Fragments of such notes have been found, some folded into keepsakes, others tucked behind beams or hidden in boxes, yet the evidence is too scarce to answer definitively. Perhaps the real truth lies in the countless lost messages that were never saved because their writers and recipients saw them as fleeting, personal things. By late afternoon, you find yourself in the village churchyard. A group of children are playing a quiet clapping game in the shade of the stone wall, their voices weaving a simple rhyme about a girl and a shepherd, one of those timeless little songs that probably dates back to a generation so far gone no one remembers its origin. At the far end of the yard sits a young woman on a low stone, her lap a flat surface for the folded piece of birch bark she writes on with careful strokes. She glances up briefly as you pass but quickly looks back down, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear as she concentrates on her task. There's something about the way she tilts her head, half smiling at whatever word she's just written, that suggests the letter will be worth saving, even if it's never delivered. You sit for a while under the shade of an old ash tree, listening to the muffled sounds of life around you, the creak of a wooden gate, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional bell from the church tower as the wind nudges its rope. The image of the boy by the well, the man on the bridge, the girl on the stone, all writing in their own way, settles in your mind like a quiet revelation. Love, here, is neither grand nor loud. It is small, careful, and often hidden in plain sight. You think again of Breda, the matchmaker, and imagine how she might one day learn of these notes, perhaps by the accidental slip of a tongue or the betrayed blush of a cheek. You can almost hear her dry chuckle. Words on bark are well and good, but they won't feed a cow or keep a roof from leaking. Still, they're a start. The sky darkens gradually, streaked with the soft violet of evening. The last of the sunlight glances off the birch trees by the stream, their pale trunks glowing briefly as if holding on to the day's warmth. You picture a note tucked beneath a doorstep or hidden in the hollow of a tree, waiting for its reader to find it under the cover of night. The thought brings a small, wry smile to your lips. It's strangely comforting to realize that across centuries, in all kinds of places, people have struggled to say the same simple thing, just in different words, on different scraps of whatever they had at hand. As the first stars blink awake in the deepening sky, the village settles into a hush. Somewhere in the distance, An unseen young man or woman is probably tucking a folded bit of bark beneath a shutter or into a crack of the door, hoping it will be found before the morning dew soaks it through. The next evening brings a soft, honey-colored glow that lingers long after the sun has dropped behind the low hills. The fields smell faintly of trampled grass and cut hay. From the village green drifts the faint hum of a fiddler testing a tune, accompanied by the hollow, rhythmic clap of wooden saws on packed earth. Someone has lit a lantern and hung it from the crooked limb of an elm, and its glow trembles on the breeze as if it, too, anticipates the gathering. You follow the narrow lane toward the sound of laughter and the low thrum of pipes. The air feels different tonight, charged, not with the wild giddiness of the festival but with a kind of soft expectation. The villagers are converging, young women in plain wool skirts but with ribbons threaded through their hair, young men who have bothered to wash the dust from their faces and straighten their patched tunics. There's an unspoken understanding that the evening dance is as close to courtship as most of them will get. The green itself is a wide, flat patch of earth under the looming silhouette of the church tower. Lanterns hang from wooden poles driven into the ground, their flames sputtering when a gust passes through. At the edge of the green, a long table holds bread, small wheels of cheese, and a jug or two of rough ale. The smell of warm grain and damp earth mingles with the sharper scent of the lantern oil. You stand for a moment in the shadows, watching as the fiddler strikes up a tune, slow at first, with a hesitant sway, then gaining confidence as the pairs begin to move. The steps are simple, more of a shifting of weight than anything resembling the intricate dances you might have expected. But there's a pattern in the simplicity, a bow of the head, a turn of the wrist, a brief clasp of hands before releasing again. Each small gesture carries a shade of meaning. A well-known fact about medieval dances is that they were often communal rather than intimate, shaped more by the patterns of the circle or line than by the closeness of any one pair. But these communal patterns still left space for subtle exchanges. A brush of fingers, a glance caught and returned, a step just a little closer than the tune required. Many marriages began not with a grand declaration but with the steady repetition of these almost incidental encounters across many such evenings. A lesser-known detail is that some dances included pauses when a couple would be left momentarily face-to-face, as if the pattern itself were conspiring to give them a heartbeat's worth of privacy. In some regions, a boy might offer a sprig of mint or a ribbon during such a pause. In others, the girl might lower her eyes but not step back, a quiet sign of encouragement that would be noticed by every watchful neighbor. Tonight the villagers on the green step and turn with the soft scuff of saws on soil. The air hums with the rhythm of their movement. A few older women sit together on low stools near the lantern poles, their hands folded over their laps, pretending to watch the children playing at the far edge of the green but occasionally letting their eyes dart to the dancers. They see everything. You suspect they're the village's unofficial chroniclers of who might be courting whom. You shift a little closer to the table of bread and ale, partly for the view and partly to eavesdrop. Two men, not much older than the dancers, lean on the table and whisper about the cooper's daughter, how she has danced twice with the same lad tonight. Their tone is neither jealous nor mocking, merely observant, as though they're taking note for the record. You catch sight of the girl herself. Her ribbon tonight is pale green, and it bobs gently as she turns with the music. Her partner looks as if he would rather face down a boar than meet her eyes, yet when their steps draw them side by side, he steals a quick glance at her face and seems to forget, for a moment, which way he should be turning. The music shifts, slower now, with a low hum from the pipes. Couples step a little nearer to each other in the softer rhythm. The boy from the fair, the one with the blue ribbon, appears hesitant at the edge of the circle. Finally, at the urging of a companion's elbow, he steps forward, offering his hand to the girl with the green ribbon. She accepts it with the briefest of nods. The onlookers murmur approval too softly for the fiddler to notice. Historians still debate just how much meaning to attribute to such dances. Were they truly the crucible of courtship, or simply an evening's entertainment after long days of work? There are records of formal dances in the courts of lords and kings, full of prescribed steps and courtly gestures, but the simple village dances left little trace except in memories, oral traditions, and scattered church edicts complaining that youths and maidens waste the evenings in idle revels. You watch as the pairs step and turn again, the lantern light glinting off hair, off the pale curve of a ribbon, off the damp earth that's been trodden flat by generations of similar gatherings. The circle of dancers closes and opens like the slow breathing of some gentle creature. A gust of wind drifts across the green and carries with it the smell of the bread cooling on the table. The dancers' steps continue, steady and soft, and for a moment you feel the entire scene sink into a kind of timelessness. One of those rare moments when past and present seem to fold over each other like layers of the same song. You realize, standing there, that most stories of great love begin not in palaces or on battlefields but in such places, under lanterns, to the sound of a fiddler's slightly wavering tune, amid the watchful eyes and half-suppressed smiles of neighbors. As the tune slows and the dancers drift apart to rest, a few wander toward the table for bread and a sip of ale. Others gather in small knots to talk, laugh, or simply stand together in the soft dark. The boy with the blue ribbon lingers near his partner, awkward but unwilling to walk away just yet. The girl seems content to let him hover nearby. The lantern flames tremble as the breeze picks up again. Somewhere on the hill above the village, an owl calls, and the fiddler raises his bow to begin another tune. Dawn comes cool and pale after the long night of dancing. A low mist lies across the meadows, making the hedgerows look like dark islands in a silver sea. The village stirs more slowly today, as if the night's music still hums faintly in everyone's ears. You notice, however, that a few figures are already awake and walking with quiet purpose. A young man carrying a bundle wrapped in coarse linen, a girl with a shawl drawn close around her shoulders. They move quickly, taking the side path that leads behind the church and out toward the old orchard. There's a certain hush about their movements, not the ordinary morning stillness but something more deliberate, as if they hope not to be seen. Curiosity draws you after them, keeping a little distance so as not to disturb whatever it is they intend. The orchard lies beyond a crumbling wall, its gate hanging crooked on one hinge. The apple trees are still heavy with the last of the season's fruit, and the damp grass beneath them glitters with dew. Here, beneath the low boughs, you catch a glimpse of the couple, the young man carefully setting down his bundle, the girl standing close beside him. They speak in low voices, too soft to hear from where you stand. When she looks up at him, her face carries a mixture of nervousness and trust that feels more private than any ribbon passed on a village green. A well-known historical fact is that in medieval Europe, love across social ranks, between, say, a craftsman's daughter and the younger son of a local lord, was often discouraged, sometimes outright forbidden. Families worried about dowries, about inheritance, about scandal. In some cases, such unions were declared invalid by custom if not by law. And yet these romances happen all the same, as quietly persistent as the grass that pushes between stones. A lesser-known detail is that secret meetings often took place not in castles or churches, but in spaces just like this orchard, gardens, meadows, sometimes even barns. Places that seemed neutral, either one family's home nor the other's, offering a semblance of privacy in a world where privacy was rare. Orchard walls and cloister gardens often became silent witnesses to the promises of couples who could not risk speaking too boldly in the open. You step softly through the dew, pausing beneath a tree heavy with greenish gold fruit. The young man produces from his bundle a small loaf of bread, clearly baked in haste, and breaks it in two, handing one half to the girl. She laughs, quietly, but with that kind of laugh that cuts through tension, and accepts it. The two of them sit beneath the tree, sharing the bread like conspirators in a tiny, harmless rebellion. As you watch them, you wonder how many such meetings must have taken place in just this orchard over the decades. How many anxious young hearts once sat here hoping the world would not notice them. The boy from the fair, the one with the blue ribbon, appears on the edge of your thoughts. You imagine that if his affection were not approved by both families, he might someday find himself here, standing in the dew beside a girl whose parents had other plans for her. Historians still debate the extent to which the church tried to enforce rules around such unions. Officially, a marriage required free consent from both bride and groom and a public declaration. No secret vows in gardens were supposed to count. Yet there are many records of couples who exchanged promises. Before God alone, without priest or witness, trusting that their words bound them. Some of these unions were later recognized, others were challenged or annulled, leaving behind only fragments of testimony in old court records. As the morning brightens, the couple in the orchard rises. The young man brushes damp grass from his knees. The girl adjusts her shawl. Before they leave, he reaches up and plucks a small apple from the tree, offering it to her with a shy, almost ceremonial care. She takes it, holding it in both hands for a moment as if it were a precious token rather than a common fruit. Then they walk together back toward the crooked gate, careful to keep a few steps apart until they are well clear of the orchard's sheltering trees. You remain a while longer beneath the branches, watching as the light grows stronger and the mist begins to burn away. A breeze stirs the leaves overhead, and the faint scent of apples mixes with the dampness of the morning grass. You can almost believe that the orchard itself has stored centuries of whispered words and tentative promises in the silence of its roots. By mid-morning you make your way back to the village. On the road you pass a pair of nuns from the nearby priory, their veils pulled low, their faces serene but unreadable. They walk briskly, heads slightly bowed, as if to shut out the world's small dramas. You wonder whether they know, or guess, how often the orchard or the priory's own garden walls serve as meeting places for those caught between duty and feeling. In the square, the usual morning bustle has resumed, carts creaking, hens scratching at the dust, a smith hammering at his forge. But here and there you notice a fleeting glance exchanged, or a figure slipping down a side path. The dance the night before may have been public, but many hearts now carry private thoughts they will not voice aloud. As you pass the church, you see the girl with the green ribbon entering with a basket of dried herbs. For a moment she hesitates on the threshold, glancing back as if hoping to see someone following. No one does. She sighs and goes in, her steps slow and careful. In that brief pause at the doorway, you sense all the unspoken feelings that fill the spaces between public smiles and private hearts. They do not make themselves known in proclamations or banners but in the hush beneath apple boughs, in the exchange of a loaf of bread, in the soft touch of a ribbon's edge. The day wears on. The sunlight slants golden over the village roofs. The orchard lies quiet again, as it must have countless times before. You cannot help thinking that its crooked gate and mossy stones will continue to witness such stories long after this generation's names have faded from memory. By late afternoon, the village has settled into that drowsy lull when the sun slides lower but has not yet lost its warmth. The smell of bread still lingers from the morning ovens, and the soft thuds of distant hammering have given way to the hum of bees in the hedgerows. You find yourself near the edge of the village green, where the old stone cross leans slightly askew and a wooden bench has been worn smooth by countless passing visitors. A small gathering is taking place nearby. 2 women with folded kerchiefs in their laps, a man in a rough woolen cap, and, at the center, an older woman whose posture is both hunched and somehow commanding. Her face is lined but her eyes remain sharp, like bright beads of jet. A few young women linger just close enough to hear, pretending to busy themselves with mending or braiding rushes. The older woman gestures with her crooked finger toward one of the girls and says something that makes the rest chuckle in muffled tones. You drift closer, curious. You realize you've stumbled upon what would once have been called a go-between, or a matchmaker. In many medieval villages, such figures played an unspoken yet important role. It wasn't merely that they arranged meetings. They acted as discreet negotiators between families, smoothing over awkward differences in dowry expectations or local standing. In some towns, these go-betweens were women who had lost husbands but gained, through long experience, a certain wisdom about human nature and human stubbornness. One well-established historical fact is that marriage in most parts of medieval Europe was as much a contract as it was an affair of the heart. Families thought of it in terms of land, inheritance, and alliances, practical matters that often had little to do with love. Even among the village folk, where fortunes were modest, the arrangement of a match could mean the difference between surviving a lean winter and falling into hardship. A lesser-known, more curious detail is that some matchmakers kept tiny notebooks or scraps of parchment, written in clumsy but determined script, where they tracked each family's daughters, the state of their dowries, and the potential suitors in nearby villages. Few of these records survive, Most were lost or discarded as unimportant, but a few fragments show lines that read like cryptic shopping lists. And age 17, 2 geese, spinning wheel, prefers cheerful husband. The old woman you watch now needs no parchment. Her memory is clearly enough. She nods toward one of the young men standing across the square, his arms folded as he leans against a cart. She murmurs something to one of the listening mothers, who pretends not to be interested, then adjusts her kerchief and listens more intently. You can feel the subtle web of calculation and hope stretching between them, as tangible as the scent of the warm bread drifting across the square. You can't help but wonder what it must be like to have your future quietly weighed and bartered for by neighbors who know not only your skills but also your temperament. Historians still debate how much sway such matchmakers truly held, whether they were powerful shapers of destinies or merely conduits for the wishes of the families who employed them. The surviving records suggest both. In some villages, a respected go-between could make or break a match. In others, she was more a messenger, blamed when things went awry but seldom praised when all went well. You notice a pair of young people nearby pretending to be uninterested in the gathering, though their sideways glances betray them. The boy idly kicks at a pebble, the girl fusses with the fringe of her sleeve. The old matchmaker, sharp-eyed, seems to notice too. A faint, knowing smile plays at the corners of her lips. You suspect she will file that detail away and bring it up later, perhaps over a quiet cup of ale with the girl's mother. A breeze stirs the dust, and the square slowly empties as the day wanes. The matchmaker stays seated for a while, resting her chin on her hand, watching as people come and go. You imagine she is tracing invisible lines from one house to another, charting possible futures the way a sailor charts a coastline. You find a seat on the old bench near the cross and take in the scene. The late sunlight lays a golden sheen across the thatched roofs. Somewhere a child is singing a nonsense rhyme, its tune meandering like the trickle of water from a half-blocked spout. The hum of the village feels less like a bustle now and more like a slow, steady heartbeat. Your gaze returns to the matchmaker. She looks like someone who has seen every possible expression of human hope and disappointment. The blushing excitement of a girl who has caught someone's eye, the tight-lipped anxiety of a father worried about dowries, the resigned sigh of a boy whose fancy lies with the wrong person. And yet, here she sits, a part of the village's quiet machinery, neither celebrated nor despised, but essential in her own unassuming way. A memory surfaces of the orchard earlier that morning, the couple sharing their secret loaf of bread beneath the apple tree. You wonder what the matchmaker would make of them, if she would see their clandestine breakfast as folly or as the seed of something genuine worth nurturing. The thought lingers as the sun dips lower. The matchmaker finally rises, slow but steady, dusts off her hands, and begins to walk with measured steps toward the lane that leads to her small cottage. As she goes, the young man leaning by the cart and the girl with the fidgeting sleeves exchange another quick glance, this one bolder, more like a spark than a shy flutter. The square empties further. The bees retreat from the hedgerows as shadows grow longer. You feel the day's warmth ebb and are grateful for the light breeze that carries the scent of hay and hearth smoke. It occurs to you that this modest scene, so ordinary at first glance, is one of the quiet foundations on which countless medieval families began, not with a grand romance or a dramatic elopement, but with a glance noticed by an older neighbor, a murmur exchanged under the hum of bees, and the practical calculation of who might suit whom. By the time the first bell from the church tower rings for vespers, the matchmaker's bench is empty, and the square has returned to its calm rhythm. Still, you suspect that before the next fair arrives, one or two discreet proposals will have been suggested, a few cautious conversations will have been had, and perhaps, on some chilly morning, a girl will find a ribbon or a sprig of rosemary waiting at her doorstep. As the bell's echo fades into the cool evening air, you rise from the bench and turn toward the lane that leads to the edge of the village, where the fields begin. The sky is streaked with the first deep hues of twilight. Behind you, the matchmaker's work, though invisible to the eye, continues to shape the paths that hearts and families will follow. Twilight settles over the village in soft layers, lavender and dusky blue deepening into the first velvet hints of night. The air smells of cooling bread and faint wood smoke. Above the thatched roofs, a first evening star trembles into view. As you walk toward the cluster of houses near the church, you notice a peculiar stir among a few villagers. Someone is carrying a rushlight, and others are quietly setting out small stools beneath the eaves. You follow them, intrigued, and soon realize that you've arrived at a place where, despite the darkening sky, the real business of matchmaking often begins. A modest timber-framed house stands slightly apart from its neighbors. Its shutters are drawn back to let in the lingering glow of dusk. Inside, an older couple sit close together on a bench by the hearth. Their faces are serious but not unkind. Before them, two younger people, barely more than teenagers, sit stiffly on low stools. You take a step inside, ducking beneath the lintel. The air smells of rushes and wool, and of bread gone cold on a platter. What you've come upon is what in some parts of medieval Europe was called a wooing night. Not quite a date in the modern sense, but a structured visit arranged by the families, where a prospective suitor would come to the house of the girl he admired. It was a chance to see one another in the flicker of firelight, to hear each other speak a few words beyond polite greetings in the square, and, if both families approved, to imagine a shared future. A widely accepted historical fact is that such visits were common in many rural communities, particularly in England, France, and the Low Countries. A suitor might come with a small gift, sometimes a bit of honeycomb, a piece of fine cloth, or a twist of herbs tied with thread. These gestures weren't merely romantic. They were symbolic of his ability to provide and to be attentive. A lesser-known, rather endearing detail is that in some regions, especially in the far north, these visits were called bundling nights. The suitor might be permitted to sit beside the girl on a bench, or even lie beside her on a bed, but with a heavy wooden board or a thick blanket between them, and often under the watchful eye of her parents. This strange compromise between intimacy and caution was meant to allow conversation in comfort, while preserving propriety. According to a few scattered accounts, the squeak of a bedboard on such nights could spark both embarrassment and laughter. You glance around the room. A low table holds 2 cups of thin ale and a small round loaf that has been neatly cut in quarters. The young man sitting stiffly across from the girl looks as though he's rehearsing every word in his head. His hands are folded tight in his lap. The girl's eyes flicker toward him, then down at the bread. The older couple exchange a glance, which you imagine contains 100 silent questions. Is he steady? Is she kind? Will they suit each other in labor and in temper? The silence stretches long enough for you to hear the faint crackle of the rushlight. Then the girl's mother asks the boy a simple question about his father's small holding, how many sheep they keep, how the lambs fared in the spring. The boy answers in a quiet but steady voice. The girl allows herself a tiny smile at the sound of it. You can almost feel the tension ease by a degree. Conversation begins to flow, haltingly at first, like a shy brook after a dry season. He tells a brief story about carrying sacks of grain to the mill. She asks about his younger sister's health. The father grunts approval, which, in this setting, might as well be a blessing. Historians still debate how much choice young people truly had in such arrangements. The official stance of the church was that both bride and groom had to give their free consent for a marriage to be valid. Yet social pressure was a powerful force. A daughter could rarely refuse a match her parents encouraged, and a son often felt obliged to seek a union that would strengthen his family's standing. Still, the quiet glances, the hesitant smiles, the subtle shifts in posture suggest that personal feeling played a part, if only in small, precious moments like this. As the evening deepens, the rushlight guttering low, the mother fetches a small jug of warm cider. The young man and girl each take a cup. For a few moments, the conversation grows easier. The girl even dares a light remark about how clumsy he must be at dancing, an echo of the fare a few nights before. He blushes but laughs, and for the first time seems to meet her gaze fully. You notice how small gestures, passing a cup, leaning forward slightly to catch a softly spoken word, carry immense weight in this room. There is no grand declaration, no dramatic promise, only the quiet weaving of 2 lives into the same pattern of hearth smoke and daily labor. When the meeting draws to a natural close, the boy rises and bows slightly to the parents. They nod, their expression still reserved but no longer skeptical. The girl escorts him to the door. At the threshold, in the dim light spilling from the hearth, he offers her the smallest of tokens, a sprig of rosemary wrapped in a twist of cloth. She accepts it, not looking at him, but at the sprig, as if studying its scent will keep her from smiling too broadly. You step outside as the boy makes his way back down the narrow lane, his steps light despite the gathering dark. The village seems hushed now except for the soft thrum of crickets in the grass and the occasional bleat of a sheep settling in for the night. You look back at the small house. Through the slightly open door, you see the girl still holding the rosemary, her parents speaking to each other in low, measured tones. Whatever they decide, this night will linger in her memory, not as a story of passion and defiance, but as a tender, nervous evening when the possibility of a shared future first felt real. A breeze moves through the hedges, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. The stars above seem sharper now against the deepening night. You can almost imagine them leaning a little closer, curious about these small beginnings of human connection, so fragile and yet so enduring. The lane stretches ahead of you, dim and quiet, leading back toward the square. Somewhere behind shuttered windows, other families are having similar conversations, weighing similar hopes. The thought gives you a sense of continuity, the lives and choices of countless people, most of them unnamed in any chronicle, braided together by evenings like this. As you reach the square, the bell in the church tower tolls softly, calling the village to the final prayers of the day. You pause for a moment, letting the slow rhythm of the sound steady your breathing. It feels as though the entire village exhales together in the gathering dark. Morning comes quietly, with a faint mist that clings low along the hedgerows and cobbled lanes. You wake to the smell of damp hay and the far-off bleat of sheep grazing at the edge of the village fields. There's a softness to the light, silvered and pale, that makes the world feel half-formed, as if still dreaming. By the time you walk toward the church square, the mist has begun to lift. The bell has rung for the early service, and a few villagers move briskly along the paths, cloaks pulled tight against the lingering chill. Their expressions are calm but purposeful. Something about the air suggests anticipation, as though the day holds a promise or a threshold to be crossed. You notice a cart standing near the lych gate, draped with a length of clean, undyed linen. A sprig of hawthorn, tied with a narrow strip of blue cloth, has been tucked between the wooden slats. Its presence feels symbolic, like a quiet announcement. You soon learn that today is not a market day but a day for something rarer and far more personal, a hand-fasting. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially in villages distant from urban centers, a marriage often began not with a grand church ceremony but with a simpler, older ritual. The couple would pledge themselves to each other by joining hands, literally fastening them together with a cord or ribbon, before family, neighbors, and sometimes a priest. This public promise could be as binding as a later church wedding. It signified that the two people were now joined in the eyes of their community, and they hoped, before God. One well-accepted historical fact is that until the late Middle Ages, a spoken vow between two consenting adults, exchanged in the present tense and in the presence of witnesses, was recognized as a valid marriage. Elaborate ceremonies in churches became more common over time, but for centuries the heart of the union lay in the mutual promise and the joining of hands. A lesser-known, slightly curious detail is that in some regions, particularly in Scotland and parts of the north of England, hand-fasting could be a temporary contract. The couple might pledge themselves for a year and a day, after which they could either formalize the union in the church or part ways. Such arrangements were rare but not unheard of, and they show how practical and adaptable communities could be in dealing with the realities of love, labor, and survival. As you step closer to the churchyard, you see the couple, a young man in a plain woolen tunic, freshly brushed but still marked with the wear of fieldwork, and a young woman in a gown of soft brown, with a simple braid of hair resting over her shoulder. Her hands are clasped tightly before her, fingers twined as if to hold in both nerves and excitement. The parents of each stand close by, solemn yet clearly moved. The priest, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a surprisingly gentle voice, gestures for them to stand side by side. The villagers gather in a loose circle, their breath fogging faintly in the cool air. The couple look at each other, not boldly but with the quiet, steady gaze of people who have already weighed their choice and are ready to stand by it. A strip of green ribbon, perhaps borrowed from a festive garment, is brought forward. The priest takes each of their right hands and binds them together loosely but firmly. His voice carries across the small crowd as he recites a prayer, asking for blessing and constancy. Then he steps aside, and the couple speak their vows in soft but clear voices. There is no flourish needed, only a shared promise, as direct as the clasp of their hands. You notice a hush fall over the onlookers. Even the children who had been fidgeting a moment ago seem to sense the gravity of the moment. When the vows are finished, there is a murmur of approval, relieved, almost tender, and the priest smiles, raising his hand in blessing. The couple's hands are unbound, but they do not let go right away. Instead, they remain linked as they walk a few steps to where a small table has been set beneath a hawthorn tree. There, a loaf of bread and a cup of ale await. They break the bread together, and each takes a bite, then share a sip from the same cup. This simple act feels as much a part of the binding as any prayer or cord. Historians still discuss how such ceremonies evolved, whether the church absorbed an older, pre-Christian tradition or merely formalized customs that had long existed in villages. The mingling of sacred and practical elements remains a subject of quiet debate. But in this moment, the discussion seems abstract. What matters here is the expression on the couple's faces, not elation, not fear, but a grounded sense of having stepped forward together. After the brief ritual, neighbors step up to offer small gifts: a skein of dyed wool, a pair of wooden spoons, a bundle of dried herbs tied neatly with twine. Each item is modest, yet each speaks of care for the new household the couple will build. The mother of the bride dabs at her eyes with a corner of her kerchief, while the father of the groom clears his throat and mutters something that makes the nearby men chuckle softly. As the morning sun strengthens, its rays turning the lingering dew into glints of silver, the crowd begins to disperse. Some head to their fields, others to their workshops, but each departs with the faint glow of having witnessed something significant. For all the daily worries and chores, the village has, for a moment, come together to mark a change in the pattern of two lives. You linger for a while, watching as the couple step aside beneath the hawthorn, speaking in low voices that carry no farther than the shade of its branches. The girl holds the green ribbon now, as if considering what to do with it. She finally ties it around her wrist, a small, private sign of the morning's promise. The breeze picks up and stirs the branches of the hawthorn. Its tiny buds are just beginning to open, hinting at the late spring that will soon brighten the hedges with white blooms. You think of how many such trees have stood as quiet witnesses to vows, some still standing, others long since felled for timber, each one a marker of hope renewed. As you turn to leave the churchyard, the bell rings once more, its tone softer now in the warming air. The sound seems to follow you down the lane, mingling with the rhythmic creak of a distant mill wheel and the murmur of the river beyond the fields. You find yourself reflecting on how these vows, so plain and spare, carried immense weight in a world where few things were secure. A clasp of hands, a few spoken words, the sharing of bread and ale, these were not mere gestures but the weaving of two lives into the fabric of the village. Ahead, the road bends gently between hedgerows, leading back toward the square. The day is brightening, and already you can hear the lowing of cattle and the faint laughter of children at play. Life goes on, but a subtle shift has occurred in the village. A new household has begun, bound by promises both tender and practical. The late afternoon sun lies low over the fields, gilding the tips of the barley and warming the pale stones of the cottages. The village is quieter than usual. There is a sense of pause, a breath drawn in and held. You follow the sound of distant bells and find yourself walking along the narrow path that leads to the churchyard once again. The grass here is neatly kept, cropped close by the grazing geese, and the small wooden gate creaks as you push it open. Beyond it, the church door stands ajar, letting out the faint scent of beeswax and damp stone. From inside, you hear murmured voices, not the lively chatter of a fair or the hushed awe of a wedding, but the steady cadence of people at prayer. You step in quietly. The coolness of the interior wraps around you like water. The stone floor is worn smooth by generations of feet. The air carries a trace of incense, though the smoke has long since dissipated. Light spills through narrow windows of uneven glass, falling in pale stripes across the rough wooden benches. Today, the congregation is gathered not for celebration but for what you soon recognize as a betrothal blessing, a step between the promise of hand fasting and the solemnity of a full church wedding. The young couple who pledged themselves beneath the hawthorn that morning now kneel side by side near the chancel rail. Their joined hands rest on a small cushion, and the green ribbon from the morning's vow lies coiled nearby like a tender keepsake. A widely accepted historical fact is that as the medieval centuries passed, the Church increasingly encouraged couples to formalize their unions at the altar, where their vows could be witnessed by the priest and by God. By the 13th century, many regions required the public proclamation of bans, announcements made on 3 consecutive Sundays, to allow anyone with a lawful objection to come forward before the wedding day. This growing oversight reflected the Church's desire to ensure that marriages were not secret and that both parties entered into them freely. A lesser-known detail is that, in some villages, the betrothal itself was almost as celebrated as the wedding. It marked the moment when the two families were publicly bound to honor the match. Feasts were sometimes held after the betrothal blessing, not as lavish as those for the wedding, but still marked by a sharing of bread, wine, and small gifts, a communal acknowledgement that the union was on its way to becoming permanent. You watch as the priest raises his hands over the kneeling couple. His words are soft, the Latin phrases flowing like a slow brook through a summer meadow. The couple bow their heads as he invokes steadiness and patience for them, qualities as vital to a shared life as affection itself. The parents of each stand behind them, close enough to offer support yet far enough to grant them the space of this moment. Their faces are solemn, but in their eyes there is an unmistakable warmth. The villagers present seem equally moved, some murmuring brief prayers of their own. The hush inside the church is so complete that you can hear the faint rustle of the green ribbon on the cushion when a draft slips through the open door. It stirs as if acknowledging the prayers offered above it. Historians still debate the extent to which such ceremonies replaced older customs like hand fasting. Did the Church merely layer its blessing atop what communities were already doing, or did it gradually reshape the practice, turning private vows into public sacrament? The records suggest a gradual blending, an ongoing negotiation between long-held traditions and growing ecclesiastical authority. When the blessing concludes, the couple rise slowly, their faces flushed but serene. The priest places a lighted taper in each of their hands, a simple symbol of the light they are expected to keep for one another. The flames flicker in the dim interior, casting faint halos on the uneven walls. For a brief moment, the entire gathering seems to breathe in unison, as if acknowledging something both solemn and fragile in the sight of those two small flames. The taper light also illuminates the carved faces on the ends of the pews, worn, almost unrecognizable creatures and saints whose silent witness spans centuries. You wonder how many such blessings they have seen, how many hopes kindled like tapers that burned brightly for a time before being snuffed out by the winds of chance or hardship. As the couple turn to leave, the congregation follows, spilling out into the cool evening air. The bells in the tower ring once, then again, a slow rhythm that rolls across the village and out toward the fields. Neighbors gather near the church door to offer quiet congratulations. No cheering, no music, just words and smiles exchanged like gentle lanterns passed from hand to hand. A child toddles forward shyly and offers the bride-to-be a small bundle of daisies tied with a scrap of twine. She kneels to accept them, and in that simple gesture, the awkward gift, the bright, clumsy smile, you see the way love and community meet, not in grand gestures but in small, human exchanges. The evening deepens as the last of the daylight fades behind the distant ridge. A faint mist begins to gather in the hollows of the fields again, silver in the dimming light. The couple walks side by side down the path, carrying their tapers carefully against the breeze. Behind them, their parents and neighbors follow at a respectful distance, speaking in low voices. You remain a moment longer near the church door, looking up at the tower's dark outline against the twilight sky. A single star glimmers above it, and you think of all the vows spoken beneath that star over the centuries, some fulfilled, some broken, some remembered only in names carved on old wooden pews. When you finally turn to follow the others back toward the village, the scent of beeswax and cool stones still clings to your sleeves. The hush of the blessing lingers in your ears even as the murmur of evening voices rises ahead of you. The path winds gently between the hedgerows, and fireflies spark here and there above the grass, like tiny tapers answering the two carried by the couple. You imagine how, tomorrow and the next day and the next, the routines of fieldwork, weaving, and bread baking will continue as always. And yet, quietly, the shape of the village has changed. Another pair has stepped forward, bringing with them not only their own hopes but the hopes of all who gathered to witness them. The moon has climbed higher by the time you reach the green again. The small square is dim and hushed, lit mostly by the soft glow spilling from cottage doorways and the occasional lantern swaying gently above a lintel. The crowd that celebrated so loudly at the fair earlier is gone. In its place remains only the low murmur of neighbors bidding each other good night. You notice that the couple who pledged and were blessed today have lingered near the old hawthorn tree. A faint breeze stirs its branches, and the green ribbon you remember from the morning's ceremony flutters like a sleepy banner. They stand quietly together, speaking in low voices you can't quite hear, but the tilt of their heads toward one another suggests a closeness that needs no words. A widely accepted historical fact is that in much of medieval Europe, even after a church blessing, couples often did not live together right away. A period of weeks or even months might pass while the families finalized dowry arrangements, gathered gifts, or prepared a new household. The wedding feast that marked the true beginning of married life was sometimes delayed until harvest or spring, when resources were more plentiful. A lesser-known detail is that some villages believed that if the bride and groom saw each other by moonlight before the wedding night, it could draw envy from unseen spirits. To ward this off, they might be escorted home by a relative carrying a candle, something about the steady, human-made flame reassuring against whatever might lurk in the dark. You see a faint echo of that custom tonight, an older woman, perhaps an aunt, holding a small lantern as she waits by the edge of the square for the young pair. You follow the slow movement of villagers back toward their cottages. The night air is cool and carries the scent of hearth smoke and damp grass. A dog pads silently across the lane, pausing to watch you with cautious, shining eyes before disappearing behind a low fence. Somewhere nearby, a lute is being tuned, soft, uncertain plucks that sound less like music and more like a whisper. The couple finally turn from the hawthorn, still speaking in hushed tones. The groom carries one of the tapers from the church. It burns low now, but its glow is steady. The bride's ribbon is looped loosely around her wrist, its ends trailing like the tails of a kite. They walk toward the aunt's lantern, then disappear with her into the shadowed lane leading to the bride's family home. You remain for a moment beneath the hawthorn tree, gazing at the ribbon left tied to one of its branches, a simple, quiet reminder of promises made. A moth flutters past your ear, drawn toward the lantern light, then veers away again into the night. Above, the sky is clear, spangled with stars. Their pale light seems to rest gently on the rooftops and thatched eaves, softening the hard edges of the village into a kind of dreamlike stillness. Historians still debate how much of this quiet, moonlit side of medieval courtship ever made it into written records. Chronicles often focused on the politics of marriage among nobles, the dowries, alliances, and scandals, leaving the quieter rhythms of ordinary village life unrecorded. How many such scenes as the one you now witness were lost to memory, unmarked but no less real? You start back toward the inn where you began this journey. The door creaks as you push it open, and a faint warmth of dying embers greets you, along with the scent of wood smoke and stale ale. A lone traveler snores softly in a corner bench, his hat tilted over his eyes. The innkeeper, polishing a mug with slow circles of his cloth, nods to you in passing but does not speak. You climb the narrow wooden stairs to the small loft where you've been given a bed. The boards creak under your feet, and the single candle on the bedside table flickers as you close the door behind you. The night air drifts in through a crack in the shutters, carrying with it the faraway sounds of a dog barking and a rooster, confused by the moonlight, offering a half-hearted crow. Sitting on the bed, you take a moment to listen. The village has grown almost entirely still. The day's sounds, the hammering at the blacksmith's, the bustle of the fair, the bells of the church, have been replaced by a low, continuous hush. Even the wind outside seems to have softened, as though the world itself is breathing slowly, preparing for rest. The candlelight throws a wavering glow on the wall, picking out the uneven plaster and the shadows cast by the wooden beams. It is a simple room, yet you find comfort in its sparseness. The single window gives a view of the green, where the hawthorn tree stands in silhouette against the starlit sky. You imagine the ribbon moving gently in the breeze, keeping its silent vigil over the village and the young couple's vows. You stretch out on the rough woolen blanket, feeling its scratchy warmth against your skin. The faint murmur of voices from the inn's common room below fades as the last of the patrons settle in for the night. Your eyes grow heavier as the candle burns lower, its flame narrowing to a thin, quivering tongue of light. As you drift towards sleep, you recall the small details of the day: the morning mist over the fields, the hawthorn blossoms crushed underfoot, the playful arguments over dowries, the solemn hush of the church blessing, the flicker of lanterns under the rising moon. Each memory settles softly, like leaves on still water. You realize that while much of medieval courtship might seem strange or distant, the handfastings, the feast customs, the whispered superstitions, beneath it all lies the same human hope, the wish to find someone to share the work, the cold nights, the small joys. The tools and the customs change, the hope endures. You turn your face toward the window one last time, watching the pale starlight slip across the floor. Somewhere out there, the couple who knelt before the priest tonight lie awake in separate homes, perhaps thinking of the same future, perhaps sharing the same nervous anticipation. The ribbon stirs in the night breeze, and for a moment it seems to wave gently, as if bidding you rest. The candle has burned down to a tiny red ember in the pool of melted wax. Its soft light fades at last, leaving the room bathed in silver moonlight. Outside, the village sleeps beneath a quilt of darkness, stitched with the faint shimmer of distant stars. You take a slow, deep breath. The air is cool and smells faintly of wood smoke and wild flowers carried from the meadow beyond the fields. Your chest rises and falls in a steady rhythm, in time with the quiet hush that has settled across the land. The last distant sounds, the creak of a cottage shutter, the bleat of a sleepy sheep somewhere near the edge of the village, grow fainter still, as though they too are settling in for the night. The world feels softer, wrapped in a kind of gentle stillness. Your eyelids grow heavier, your breath slower. You imagine the hawthorn tree standing quiet under the stars, its branches moving slightly in the breeze, the ribbon fluttering softly like a heartbeat in sleep. You let the image linger, the tiny cottages clustered like shells around the village green, the faint glow of a few embers still burning in hearths, the dark outlines of the hills beyond. All is at rest. You feel the weight of your body sink deeper into the bedding, the muscles of your shoulders and neck loosening as if releasing the day. With each exhale, the world seems to recede a little farther, the edges of thought softening like mist over a morning field. Beyond the window, the sky stretches out, vast and silent. A few stars still glimmer, their light having traveled centuries to reach you, steady and calm. You breathe in again, and as you breathe out, you let go. End of script. Sweet dreams.